morning and welcome to another edition of Good Morning Trinidad and Tobago. I'm Vina Bharat. Remember, we're also on Talk City 91.1 FM and online at ctvtt.com. A few things to keep your eyes on. Now, the Prime Minister is meeting with the trade union bodies at 2 p.m. today at his office. The movement had written to the Prime Minister for a meeting last Friday. However, that did not materialize. It was only until Monday evening, while in Tobago, that Dr. Keith Rowley announced his office would contact the Federation to meet later today. So we'll have the developments on Thursday. Now, to events at hand, tragedy reported yesterday. The discovery of the body of a baby at the Beetham landfill and the discovery of the body of missing hiker and father Richard Baird. Now, this is not the first time a hiker has lost his life, but it raises a number of questions. Recently, a group of clubs and groups came together to form a hiking association to address issues and even challenges affecting the sector. Joining me via phone is Interim Secretary Michael Jattan. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Now, tragic loss of life. Were you involved in the search for Mr. Baird?
I was involved in the search on Monday, as well as yesterday, but off-site yesterday.
Now, what was the reason or the purpose for the formation of your association, first of all?
Well, we have recognized the need to ensure that we are all on the same page when it comes to proper operations, proper safety standards in regard to operations. And having recognized that, we decided, no, we need to actually work together closely. We all have an input to make to ensure that each person who undertakes a hike with any organization, or even on their own in a small group, would strive to operate in a manner that is safe for themselves and for the persons who accompany them.
Well, clearly something went wrong in this instance. Would you say that groups normally follow the procedure?
I would say that there are concerns and there are deficiencies, and having recognized those deficiencies, this was the impetus for forming the organization. They need also to operate in a manner that is taking into consideration the proper conservation of the trail, the preservation of the trail. And again, the main concern is really safety, ensuring that groups that conduct hikes are aware that they need to, for example, have first aid kits. They need to have checked the trail before. They need to keep the groups together, have a proper ratio of hike leaders to hikers.
Okay, would you be able to walk us through what is supposed to happen on a hike? I understand you're supposed to always stay together, be responsible, stick to the intended route, avoid shortcuts. Could you give us some ideas of what you're expected to do on a hike?
Well, a hike starts, you could say, before the actual day. A hike, for example, like the hike that was undertaken on Saturday, that particular hike would be rated as challenging. Once you have a hike that is challenging and you advertise it as such, and persons begin to call you, you need to ensure that you have a proper screening process. You would need to ask the individual certain questions. For example, have they ever hiked before? And if they have hiked before, when was their last hike? And also, what was the level of that hike? You need to get a sense of if they have any conditions that may impact upon their ability to actually do the hike. For example, do they have any knee injuries? Do they have any back injuries? Do they have any medical issues, for example, hypertension, diabetes, and are they managing those conditions? So the process starts before. Now, once let's say someone goes through that screening process and they're deemed able to to be a part of the hike, and they come on the day, the assembly time, the assembly place. Before the actual hike begins, you would address the participants, and you would go through the guidelines in terms of how the hike is to proceed on the day. For example, it would be indicated those persons who would have first aid kits. You would also do a last-minute thing in terms of if anyone there has any issues that they may not have shared in respect to their medical conditions, for them to come at least and let one of the tour guides or the hike leaders be aware of that. And then in terms of the actual conducting of the hike, depending upon the number of persons who are present, you would want to put persons into groups and have hike leaders assigned to each group and keep the group essentially together, whereby persons are in sight of one another at all times. Because you don't want a situation where anyone who does not know the trail is walking on the trail by themselves. They must always be in sight of a hike leader in front, and there should always be a hike leader to the back of the group as well. And you try to keep that formation tight throughout the hike, going to the destination as well as coming back from the destination.
Let's talk a little bit about accountability within those small subgroups. Who is responsible? Is someone assigned to look after or look at the person next to them? Are you responsible for the person walking next to you or the next three persons behind you?
Essentially, hike leaders have the foremost responsibility to be observant of the participants. And that is what we encourage. And also what we say is that we encourage other participants to be mindful of the person next to them in case they may be having difficulty. And for some reason, they're unable to say that. But essentially, the foremost responsibility is that of the hike leader, to be always vigilant, you start to screen persons, as I said, even before the day of the hike. But on the day of the hike, you're looking at things, for example, like the shoes that the person is wearing, are they appropriate even before the hike begins? And if there's a concern in regards to footwear, that has to be pointed out from the start. And in some instances, you may have to tell the person, well, no, they can't undertake the hike today because they're not properly prepared for it, especially based on the terrain that you may be going to. But the foremost responsibility remains that of the hike leader, the tour guide, but also we encourage persons to have a sense of collective responsibility to look out for your fellow person on the hike as well.
So if I'm in a group of 5 persons and someone is in front of me and someone is behind me, is it my responsibility to always be looking on to make sure that they find the person in front of me or behind me? What's the procedure?
Well, as I said, it's about keeping together. Hikers, yes, they do have a responsibility, but hike leaders also have a responsibility, and I think, as I said, it's a more serious responsibility in terms of looking out, and in terms of from time to time, just to give you an example, you may be going to a particular destination, so it might be an hour long, but ever so often, the hike leader would need to stop to ensure that there isn't a wide gap between the hikers, that persons are, as I said, in sight of one another. So they don't want a situation where there's too much of a gap, somebody's on their own, and they may now there might be an off trail, a trail leading off the main trail, and they may inadvertently go down that off trail. So it's important to keep formations tight. As I said, we encourage persons to look out for one another, but essentially it must be the responsibility, it is, as far as we are concerned, and what we're encouraging in terms of our basic standard, is that the foremost responsibility is that of the hike leader, and he or she must be prepared at times to stop, to ensure that everyone is close together, and to also be looking all the time at persons, especially on the more challenging hikes, to see if they are showing any visible signs of distress.
How large is the hiking community in Trinidad and Tobago, and what do you think the impact this recent incident can have on that?
The hiking community in Trinidad has grown tremendously over the years. There was a time, perhaps about 15 to 20 years ago, there may have been just about 2 organizations in the main, but particularly over the last 5 years, it has grown tremendously, and there's certainly more than, I would say, 20 groups and more now that are in the country. And what also is happening is that because there are a number of trails that are fairly accessible and fairly easy to traverse, you have individuals, families going on their own on a number of these trails, unmindful of the dangers that could present themselves. For example, the dangers of encountering a venomous snake, the danger, for example, of the depth of some of the areas, the depth of the waterfalls, for example. So part of the trust of the association is the safety aspect. In terms of the impact, yes, it's never. But before I even continue, what I really would want to express first and foremost, and what I should have said first and foremost, is to express condolences to the family of Mr. Baird in all of this, as well as to his friends and his co-workers. The impact of this, yes, is that persons who, of course, would be saying, well, hiking is a very dangerous thing. They don't want to undertake a hike and so forth. And let's be frank, hiking does have its risks. There's no doubt about that. The onus is on organizations to work together to minimize those risks, to ensure that, for example, their hike leaders are trained in first aid and continuously recertified in first aid, also trained in life-saving, have a knowledge of fauna and flora, and have that basic skills in terms of managing a group, keeping persons together at all times, both going in and coming back out from a hiking destination.
What's the ratio of hike leaders to actual hikers?
We generally recommend a ratio of 1 hike leader to 10 hikers. That may vary depending upon the level of difficulty of a hike. On what we would call a water hike, or a hike that goes along the entire length of a river course, we would normally suggest an even lower ratio in terms of 1 hike leader to probably about 5 to 7 hikers, based on what is required in terms of helping individuals in those kinds of circumstances.
I want to talk a little bit about hiking gear. We've heard reports that Mr. Baird, that something went wrong with his shoe, the sole of his shoes probably fell off, or something went wrong somewhere. What can you tell us about hiking gear?
Well, essentially, your shoes are perhaps the most important aspect of your hiking gear. And it's important to have shoes that are probably, how should I put this? They're actually hiking shoes. There are a number of brands. And once you're going to be involved in hiking on a continuous basis, it's important for you to look into one of those popular brands of hiking shoes. And also, you don't want to pick up a shoe, as it were, that has been just cast in a corner for a couple of months when you decide to start hiking. Because invariably what happens is that it's dry rot and the sole falls off, and that's a common occurrence. So you want to invest in a proper hiking shoe, looking at what is available, and using that when you decide to undertake a hike on any trail, especially more difficult ones.
All right. Also, is there going to be a plan to create a directory of, let's say, groups, for instance, and what benchmarks are going to be set?
The association was recently formed. It was only established last month. The aim, as I said, is we inviting all persons who may have a hiking organization to be a part of the association. We want to work together to formulate standards that we will then all agree to adhere to in order to ensure that the conducting of hikes is a safe process. And once you are part of the association, and once you have agreed to adhere, as it were, to those guidelines, and once it's observed that you are in fact adhering to those guidelines, then we would be in a position to safely recommend you as a hiking organization where persons can feel comfortable to attend.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Jattan, for your time and that information. And of course, condolences also to Mr. Baird's family, friends, and co-workers.